right now. The Heritage Foundation want to welcome to the program Ted Bromund. Ted, how you doing, sir?
Very good, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. My pleasure. So you were out at the Shooting, Hunting, Outdoor Trade Show as well last week?
Yeah, absolutely.
And it was, once again, a very, very big show. As you say, though, the industry is very concerned, despite the fact that the Second Amendment appears to be, anyway, stronger than ever.
Yeah, you've got this weird paradox where the Second Amendment has won some very, very valuable victories in the Supreme Court and other courts around the nation, where the polling data on the number of people who want gun control in the United States shows a very steady decline, where gun sales in the United States have really literally never been stronger. All that looks really good. And then you talk to gun sellers and gun manufacturers, really the gun industry writ large, and you find that people love the way their sales figures are going, but they're really nervous about the last 2 years of the Obama administration.
What is it that has them so concerned, Ted?
Well, a lot of it is they look at all these victories that are being won on the national level in the battle for public opinion, and that looks great. And then they look at an administration that's very fond of the administrative pen, and they look at battles on the state level, the local level, and they see the possibility that all those gains that are won on the national level being sort of chewed away from above and below.
Okay. How concerned are they about, as you say, at the federal level, looks like you've got a Congress that is going to be, I think, a bulwark for gun owners. Now, perhaps a president who's likely to veto any pro-gun legislation that gets there. Is it the efforts of a Michael Bloomberg and the money that he's putting in around the country, ballot initiatives like what we saw in Washington State, what he's doing in Nevada, and even things like what he's doing with the Dart Center for journalism, part of the Columbia School of Journalism, where spending a relatively small amount of money, $48,000, that's a drop in the bucket to Michael Bloomberg, to fund a seminar for journalists around the country on how to report on the gun issue.
Yeah, it's all of those things and a good deal more besides. If you take a look at the national level, you have an administration that seems very eager to use the administrative powers of the ATF to clamp down not so much directly on individual firearms owners, but on the firearms industry, that is, firearms manufacturers and firearms sellers. That sort of administrative control raises a lot of concerns. Obviously, there are things like Operation Choke Point, which essentially everyone who I talked to at the SHOT Show mentioned with just absolute horror and loathing. But, in a way, that's the big story. A lot of the story is the little stuff that ATF does just by issuing rules or proposed rules that can really make life difficult for manufacturers and sellers. A lot of that stuff goes below the radar because it really doesn't touch directly on the Second Amendment. It affects your ability, perhaps, to buy a firearm, but it's not likely to be treated as a direct Second Amendment issue. A lot of that stuff really concerns the firearms industry, which is ultimately the backbone of people's right to make effective use of their Second Amendment freedoms.
What about the UN Arms Trade Treaty, Ted? This is something that, the president has signed. The Senate has not ratified. I don't think he is going to ratify the UN Arms Trade Treaty, but we're going to have more meetings this year, and the United Nations has sort of, they've taken the stance that NGOs and other groups that opposed this arms trade treaty should not even have a seat at the table, should not be allowed to be a part of these discussions. Is the industry concerned about the global effects of this UN Arms Trade Treaty?
Oh, yeah, because you only have to take a look at the U.S. firearms market. Last year, approximately 5.5 million firearms were imported into the United States. That's a huge share of the overall U.S. market. So you really can't talk about U.S. gun owners without talking about their ability to buy firearms imported from abroad. And even if you're not buying a directly imported firearm, there's a very good likelihood that what you're buying has some imported parts and components in it. Now, this is a global industry, like a lot of big industries nowadays, and something like the Arms Trade Treaty really can directly affect it. Now, I think, prediction here, that the administration will send the Arms Trade Treaty to the Senate in the relatively near future for its ratification. Now, I don't think the Senate's going to ratify it. I don't even think there'll be a vote on it. But I think you'll see that treaty go to the Senate in a relatively short order.
Okay, and when this gets rejected, Ted, then what happens next? I mean, is this going to be another perceived instigation? I'm not even sure that the president actually needs any a real instigation, but would this be seen as another perceived reason then to go after guns via the regulatory or executive action route?
Well, it won't even be rejected because it won't even be brought up for a vote. It's just going to sit in the inbox of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. And you know what? Even if the Senate voted it down 100-0, it would still be sitting in the Senate Foreign Relations inbox. Just because the Senate rejects a treaty doesn't mean it goes away. I mean, I realize this violates every understanding that folks have of sort of common sense and the way the American government works, but it's nonetheless true. The Senate can reject a treaty unanimously, and it still sits there in the Senate inbox waiting for another future Senate to take another crack at it.
Talking with Ted Bromund of the Heritage Foundation. Now, Ted, obviously the industry is not interested in simply responding passively to these threats. So when you were there at SHOT Show and talking with folks in the industry, what does the industry plan to do to be proactive?
Well, a lot of it is happening on the manufacturing level. The effect of all of these local ordinances, state measures, ballot measures, that kind of thing, the effect of that is going to be to fragment the firearms industry even more and have models of firearms that are made for specific jurisdiction. Now, the strangest thing about that is that it's probably going to drive firearm sales even higher, because people in one jurisdiction will have to buy one kind of firearm that's legal there, and another jurisdiction will have another kind of firearm, and so on and so forth. So you're going to have this weird, paradoxical effect where all of these control measures are probably going to drive firearm sales even higher into a more fragmented market. The other thing that people are looking at, of course, is work on the national level. And fundamentally, that's to discourage and hopefully ultimately to get a president to unsign the arms trade treaty and to get the U.S. to withdraw from these UN processes.
Interesting. All right. Listen, Ted, I appreciate you coming on the program, sir. It sounds like it's going to be a very interesting year for the industry and for gun owners on all different kinds of levels.
I talked to a gun seller at the SHOT Show, and he said very grumpily to me, these next 2 years are going to be really interesting.
Yeah, I think that interesting, right? And that word, maybe some opportunities out there, but certainly a time to be wary.
Yeah, things that are interesting and aren't always good news, unfortunately.
Exactly. Hey, listen, Ted, thanks again for coming on the program. It's always good talking with you.
Thank you.
Ted Bromund joined us from the Heritage Foundation right here on NRA News, Cam and Company.